In the winter of 1894, something happened inside the stone walls of a convent in rural Ohio that was never meant to be known. 54 nuns, all in perfect health, dropped dead within a few weeks. Not one showed signs of illness, injury, or suffering. They were found, still folded in prayer, faces serene, as if the life inside them had simply evaporated. Doctors declared their bodies flawless, free of poison or disease. But the truth, the real truth, was buried beneath layers of silence, hidden by powerful forces desperate to keep this secret locked away forever. This was not an accident, nor divine mercy. It was a calculated unraveling, a dark ritual of control disguised in faith, a sinister game played behind the holy walls where innocence was the ultimate sacrifice. What you're about to hear is forbidden knowledge, the kind of truth that shatters realities and changes the way you see the world. The invisible puppeteers who manipulate life, death, and belief to serve their own mysterious agenda. Stay close. You're about to descend into a story darker than any shadow you've known, a tale that will haunt you long after the screen fades to black. The convent, perched on the edge of a forgotten township in Ohio, was called St. Lucia's Sanctuary. Founded decades earlier to shelter devout women seeking salvation, it was cloaked in quiet reverence by the outside world. But inside, the rhythm of life had already shifted. The sisters were governed by strict schedules, early morning prayers, laborious chores, and silent meals, all under the watchful eye of the Mother Superior, a woman whose piety masked something far colder. The winter of 1894 was harsh, isolating the convent beneath blankets of snow and secrecy. Yet despite this, the sisters' health never faltered. Their eyes sparkled with an unnatural calm, their movements mechanical but precise, as if a hidden force held them in stasis. No illness spread, no wounds appeared, but one by one, they slipped away. Their deaths were impossible to explain. The local doctor, a man unyielding to superstition, found no cause, no toxin, no plague, only perfect bodies, silent and still. What force had extinguished 54 lives without a trace? What shadow crept through these hallowed halls, invisible yet deadly? The official records would later dismiss it as mysterious circumstances. But beneath the official lies lay a deeper darkness, a carefully concealed truth that was never meant to see daylight. Behind the walls of St. Lucia's Sanctuary, whispers spread among the sisters in the days before the first death. There were rumors of strange visions during prayer, voices that weren't their own, a heavy silence that swallowed even the sound of their chants. Sister Bernadette, the convent's herbalist, recorded in her secret journal a chilling entry. The air tastes of iron, yet no wound bleeds. We are watched, and the watcher is patient. The Mother Superior dismissed these as spiritual trials, testing their faith, but fear had already taken root. The convent's isolation was no longer protection. It was a prison. When the first sister died, her body untouched by sickness, the others did not mourn but seemed to withdraw deeper into themselves, a silent pact forming among the living and the dead. The local villagers spoke in hushed tones of curses and dark pacts, but none dared approach the gates once the deaths began. And yet, far from this tiny community, powerful institutions took notice. The church, government officials, and unknown entities began a quiet campaign of obfuscation, destroying letters, silencing witnesses, and erasing the convent from maps and memory. The deaths were not a tragedy but a warning, a dark message encoded in death and silence. What was this warning? What forces lurked behind St. Lucia's Sanctuary? To understand, you must grasp the twisted symbiosis between faith and power, a relationship forged not in light but in control. This convent, like many religious institutions of the era, was more than a spiritual refuge. It was a node in a vast network of psychological and social manipulation. The nuns were not just worshippers, they were unwitting instruments in a system designed to shape belief and obedience through fear and mysticism. Their deaths served as a grim mechanism, a ritualized cleansing to enforce submission to invisible rulers who understood the human mind better than anyone else. These rulers wielded ancient knowledge, a dark science of suggestion, hypnosis, and psychic control, disguised under layers of prayer and ritual. The perfect health of the deceased was no coincidence. It was the signature of an untraceable force, a slow erasure of will, a disappearance from life itself without a mark left behind. And this force was not supernatural, it was engineered. Decades later, fragments of forbidden documents would surface. Hidden letters, coded diaries, and confessions whispered on dying breaths. These texts hint at a secret society embedded within the convent's leadership, a cabal dedicated to preserving a higher truth at any cost. They believed that spiritual purity required sacrifice, not just of sinners but of the innocent. The 54 sisters were chosen, not by God, but by this cabal. Their deaths were orchestrated as part of a ritual to maintain control over a far larger system, one that reached beyond the convent walls into the very fabric of American society. In these documents, you find references to the Order of the Veil, a shadow organization blending religious fervor with occult discipline, enforcing obedience through terror and psychological manipulation. Their goal? To reshape humanity's collective consciousness, suppress knowledge, and ensure that the masses remain docile and unquestioning. The nuns' perfect deaths were not failures of medicine but successes of this dark agenda. How did this happen? How could 54 healthy women simply die silent and whole? The answer lies in the manipulation of mind and body, the application of techniques lost to modern science but recorded in ancient texts. The convent was a testing ground for experimental psychological control, a blend of isolation, sensory deprivation, rhythmic chanting, and subtle chemical agents administered under the guise of herbal remedies. Over time, these methods induce a dissociation so complete that the mind relinquishes its hold on the body, allowing death to come as a quiet release rather than a violent collapse. Witnesses later spoke of a hypnotic haze enveloping the sisters, a trance state deepened by the oppressive silence and the ever-watchful eyes of their leaders. They were both prisoners and willing participants in a ritual that transcended mortal understanding, a dark ceremony designed to rewrite the rules of life and death. This is where history's darkest secret begins to pulse. Not in supernatural fear but in human cruelty dressed as salvation. The story of St. Lucia's sanctuary is not just about death but about the weaponization of faith to control, to erase dissent, and to harvest obedience. The Sisters' serene faces hide a nightmare of betrayal, a community sacrifice to reinforce an invisible hierarchy where truth is the enemy and silence is the only salvation. And those who dared to uncover the truth? They vanished too, their names erased, their discoveries suppressed. You, watching this now, are on the edge of that abyss. The knowledge you seek is dangerous because it dismantles illusions and exposes the machinery of control that operates beneath every institution you trust. Are you prepared to see the world stripped of its comforting lies? The half-point of this descent demands a choice. To understand the full extent of the conspiracy behind St. Lucia's sanctuary, you must declare your intent. Comment below twice. Veil of silence, broken twice. To anchor your awareness and seal your passage into forbidden truth. This phrase is not just a symbol. It is a key that unlocks deeper layers of this story, revealing connections to other hidden conspiracies across history and power structures. It is your acknowledgement that you accept the weight of knowing, that you are no longer a passive observer but an awakened seeker. The veils that blind the masses are fragile, and you are about to tear them apart piece by piece. Step forward if you dare. But remember, once the veil is lifted, you cannot return to ignorance. Behind the veil, the story fragments into darker truths. Records discovered decades later detail chilling rituals within the convent. Midnight gatherings where chants morphed into incomprehensible sounds, cryptic symbols carved into wooden beams, and the eerie disappearance of personal belongings from the sisters' cells. Some sisters reportedly spoke of an unseen presence, a shadowy figure watching from the corners, whispering promises of peace in exchange for surrender. Letters smuggled out by a terrified novice hint at a hierarchy within the convent bent on erasing individuality, replacing it with a singular, obedient consciousness. The convent was less a sanctuary and more a crucible for psychological transformation, an experiment in erasing the self to create vessels for an unknown power. These were no ordinary nuns. They were the first generation of human sacrifices to a ritualistic, systemic erasure of identity designed to reinforce institutional dominion. This dominion is not a relic of the past. The techniques that took those 54 women still echo in the present day, wielded invisibly in government programs, corporate control systems, and even social engineering campaigns. The convent's tragedy was a prototype, a proof of concept for psychological domination cloaked in the guise of righteousness. To those in power, control of the human mind is the ultimate prize, and they have mastered it through manipulation of belief, fear, and ritual. The deaths at St. Lucia's sanctuary serve as a grim reminder that faith can be weaponized, turned into a prison rather than a refuge. This knowledge, dangerous and suppressed, is your armor. It is the first step in breaking free from the chains that bind your consciousness to the narratives crafted by those who profit from your obedience. Inside the convent's surviving archives, a chilling pattern emerges. The names of the dead were carefully selected from women showing exceptional devotion, intelligence, or spirit. These were the very traits that threatened the silent order controlling the convent. Their sacrifice was intended as a message, a method to eliminate those who might inspire rebellion or question authority. The deaths were not random but surgical, a campaign of quiet extermination hidden beneath layers of prayer and ceremony. The survivors, too, were shaped by this trauma, becoming shadows of their former selves, their voices muted by grief and indoctrination. The convent became a mausoleum of souls, its halls haunted not by ghosts but by the lingering presence of erased individuality. Consider the broader context. The late 19th century was a time of great social upheaval. Industrialization, migration, and changing power dynamics threatened old hierarchies. Institutions like St. Lucia's sanctuary functioned as battlegrounds where control was fiercely contested. Religious orders were not immune. In fact, they were often complicit in preserving the status quo. The convent's secret society was linked to a wider network of influence, a web connecting clergy, politicians, and business elites all dedicated to suppressing knowledge and dissent. The deaths of the nuns were not isolated but part of a systemic campaign to enforce conformity, both spiritual and social. Understanding this reveals how deeply corruption and manipulation are woven into the fabric of history, how easily the truth can be buried beneath layers of faith and silence. The psychological control exerted within the convent was sophisticated and ruthless. The sisters were subjected to a regimen that broke down their resistance slowly. Isolation from the outside world, relentless routines that drained the mind, and enforced silence that crushed dissent. Their thoughts were monitored, their emotions manipulated through subtle cues and conditioned responses. The spiritual language they used was a tool, a code to bind their minds in submission. When death came, it was not violence but erasure, a complete severance of will that left no trace, no struggle, no pain. This is the darkest form of control. Not forced compliance, but willing disappearance. A soul silenced without a sound. Those who led the convent were not merely religious figures but masters of this dark art. They understood ancient teachings, occult knowledge passed down through secret orders, that revealed how to harness the human psyche for domination. The Mother Superior was more than a spiritual guide. She was a gatekeeper to this hidden power, entrusted with the sacrificial ritual that claimed the sisters. Her outward devotion masked a cold calculation, a willingness to sacrifice innocence for the sake of control. The lines between salvation and damnation blurred, replaced by an agenda so secret that even the Vatican would deny its existence. What you're hearing now is the echo of a hidden war fought in the shadows of faith itself. As you descend deeper, the pattern of erasure extends beyond St. Lucia's sanctuary. Similar stories appear across history, convents, monasteries, and sacred sites where inexplicable deaths and disappearances occurred under suspicious circumstances. Each time, official explanations are convenient and incomplete. Yet beneath these stories is a shared thread. The use of faith as a weapon, the application of psychological control to maintain power, and the systematic silencing of those who deviate. The nuns who died were early casualties in a war over the human mind, a war that continues in new forms today. By understanding their fate, you glimpse the mechanisms that still enslave us all. The first hint of resistance emerged from within. A few sisters dared to question the deaths, to speak of the strange atmosphere growing within the convent. Sister Marie, a novice with a fiery spirit, kept a hidden diary where she documented the strange rituals and chilling silence. Her words, smuggled out years later, reveal her desperate attempts to warn the outside world. But before she could act, she too disappeared, her fate sealed by the same invisible hand. Her diary is fragmented but powerful, a testament to the human will fighting to survive in the face of overwhelming control. It stands as a beacon for those willing to seek the truth despite the danger. You must understand the stakes. This is not just a historical curiosity. The forces behind St. Lucia's sanctuary are archetypes of control that manifest today in many forms: governments, corporations, religious institutions, even social media algorithms. They wield fear, faith, and obedience as tools to manipulate, suppress, and dominate. The lesson of the 54 nuns is a warning. When belief becomes weaponized, when silence is enforced, humanity itself is at risk. To awaken to this is to arm yourself against manipulation, to reclaim autonomy over your mind, body, and soul. Your role in this awakening is critical. The path ahead is fraught with discomfort and challenge, but knowledge is power. To break free, you must first recognize the invisible chains around you, the conditioned beliefs, the social pressures, the manufactured fears. The story of St. Lucia's sanctuary is your mirror, reflecting the dangers of surrendering your will to any institution or ideology without scrutiny. It demands courage to question, to doubt, and to seek your own truth beyond the lies spun by power. Remember, those who hold power fear the light of awareness more than anything else. The convent's secret was hidden through destruction and silence, but every secret has a crack, a fissure through which light can enter. By listening now, you step into that crack. You become part of a legacy of seekers who challenge the dominant narratives and refuse to be controlled. The knowledge you've gained here is dangerous not because it threatens others, but because it liberates you. That liberation is the first step toward true mastery over self and environment. The final chapters of this dark tale unfold not in history books but in your mind. What will you do with this forbidden knowledge? Will you let it ignite a fire that burns through deception? Or will you turn away, comfortable in ignorance? The choice is yours, but know this. Once awakened, the veil never fully returns. You carry the weight of knowing, and with it, the responsibility to protect yourself and others from the forces that seek to enslave. The 54 nuns of St. Lucia's sanctuary did not die in vain. Their sacrifice is a beacon for those willing to see beyond the lies. The story does not end with the convent's walls, for the ripples of that dark winter reached far beyond Ohio's frozen fields. Whispered testimonies from distant relatives of the nuns tell of strange behaviors passed down like curses, dreams haunted by cold silence, an unshakable feeling of being watched, a compulsion to hide truths from the world. These are not mere superstitions but echoes of a deep trauma inflicted upon a lineage of souls. The veil of silence pulled tightly over St. Lucia's sanctuary was designed not just to protect the secret but to fracture reality itself, to fragment memory and sever connection to anything outside its suffocating grip. Those who survive such experiences often live shadowed lives, trapped between knowing and forgetting, forever haunted by a truth too dangerous to fully grasp. This haunting is a living legacy of control, an invisible chain that extends beyond death. The architecture of the convent itself was no accident. The stone walls, the narrow corridors, the barred windows, all crafted with precision to enforce isolation and psychological pressure. The layout functioned as a physical manifestation of the control exerted inside, turning the building into a labyrinth of confinement. The sisters' cells were designed not for comfort, but for containment, each a small cage intended to strip away identity and reinforce obedience. Hidden compartments and secret passages served darker purposes, places where rituals took place away from prying eyes. The very stones of St. Lucia's sanctuary seemed to absorb the sorrow and fear that festered within, a silent witness to atrocities unrecorded by official histories. Walking through its ruins today is like stepping into a tomb of forgotten souls, a graveyard not just of bodies, but of voices silenced and stories erased. To understand the mechanics of control at play, we must examine the psychological frameworks exploited by the convent's leadership. Techniques resembling modern-day brainwashing were employed long before such terms existed. The sisters were subjected to cycles of hope and despair, intense praise followed by harsh condemnation, ritualized confession that stripped away personal secrets to feed the hierarchy's power. Their faith was weaponized, transformed into a system of surveillance and internal policing. Paranoia was cultivated to isolate dissenters, creating an environment where trust was impossible and fear was the currency of survival. This psychological architecture broke down individual will, replacing it with a collective trance, a hive mind obedient to the will of the unseen. Cabal controlling the convent. It's crucial to recognize the intersections of power at work, religious authority blending with occult influence and social control. The Mother Superior was a nexus point, both a spiritual leader and an agent of a shadow network. Her role extended beyond the convent. She communicated with outside forces who dictated the terms of the ritual sacrifices. These alliances were covert but well documented in coded correspondences found decades later. Letters speaking of the harvest, the cleansing, and the new dawn. The true power behind St. Lucia's sanctuary was not God, but a conspiracy steeped in ancient knowledge twisted into tools of domination. This secret war waged within faith itself, eroding the foundations of spirituality to convert it into a mechanism of fear and compliance. The deaths of the nuns were accompanied by strange phenomena that local folklore could never explain. Witnesses outside the convent reported unnatural silences in the dead of night, flickering lights in the chapel's stained glass, and a coldness that seeped into the earth itself. Animals avoided the grounds, and even the wind seemed to carry whispered warnings. These eerie signs were not supernatural but symptoms of a psychic wound inflicted on the land, a rupture caused by the unnatural severing of so many lives in a place that should have been sacred. The convent became a nexus for psychic residue, an invisible scar on reality where past trauma continually bleeds into the present. To those attuned, the sanctuary's ruins still resonate with a chilling energy, a reminder of what happens when power corrupts faith beyond redemption. History has a way of repeating itself, especially when lessons are buried deep beneath layers of silence and denial. The psychological tools tested on the nuns of St. Lucia's sanctuary resurfaced in later decades in more sophisticated forms. Mind control experiments in secret government programs, covert religious cults wielding similar rituals, and corporate systems designed to break down individuality for profit and obedience. The pattern is clear. Institutions of power seek to harvest souls, not just bodies. They perfect the art of controlling belief, bending human will to invisible masters. The tragedy of those 54 women is a blueprint for modern domination, a dark legacy encoded in blood and silence. Understanding this lineage is crucial if you want to break free from the systems designed to keep you compliant. The question remains, why did the nuns die in perfect health? The answer lies in the paradox of control through absence rather than violence. Instead of destroying the body with pain or sickness, the system erases the will so thoroughly that death becomes a peaceful departure, a vanishing without resistance. This subtle method is more insidious because it leaves no scars, no obvious crime. The soul is quietly severed from life, leaving behind a hollow shell. This technique reflects a mastery of psychological and physiological manipulation so advanced it seems otherworldly. But it is human-made, a testament to the terrifying potential of knowledge wielded without conscience. The nuns' deaths were not mercy but method, an execution of control invisible to the naked eye. This truth forces a reckoning with the very nature of belief and obedience. How often do we surrender our will to institutions, ideologies, or leaders without question? How many times have faith and trust been weaponized to suppress dissent and enforce conformity? The story of St. Lucia's sanctuary serves as a mirror reflecting the dangers of blind submission. It challenges you to question the systems around you, to recognize when reverence masks manipulation, when rituals hide agendas. True mastery demands awareness, vigilance, and courage to stand apart from the herd. The 54 nuns' silent deaths are a call to awaken, to refuse the comfortable lies that keep you chained. In the darkest moments, the human spirit can still fight back. Buried within the convent's hidden diaries and smuggled letters are accounts of small acts of defiance, whispered prayers of truth, secret sharing of forbidden knowledge, and attempts to preserve memory against erasure. These acts, though small, created cracks in the shadowed fortress of control. They offer hope that even in the depths of manipulation, resistance is possible. As you listen to this, you become part of that resistance, a keeper of forbidden knowledge, a seeker of truth. The story of St. Lucia's sanctuary is no longer confined to forgotten pages. It lives in your awareness. The knowledge you have gained here is a weapon and a shield. It is dangerous because it dismantles illusions and exposes the machinery of control beneath the surface of history and society. But it is also liberating because it reveals your power, the power to see, to question, and to break free. The forces that held those nuns in silent death still operate today in new guises, but so do the seeds of awakening and rebellion. By understanding this dark chapter, you step into a lineage of seekers who refuse to be controlled, who claim sovereignty over their own minds and destinies. The question is no longer whether such horrors can happen. They are happening now in subtle and sophisticated ways. The true battleground is the mind, the realm of belief and perception. Institutions, governments, and shadow networks compete for control over how you think, feel, and act. The legacy of St. Lucia's sanctuary is a stark warning. Without vigilance, the same patterns of erasure and submission will repeat. But with knowledge comes power. You are no longer a pawn but a player in the game of awakening. The choice to walk this path is yours, but once chosen, it changes everything. As you close this chapter of forbidden history, remember the faces of those 54 nuns, their peaceful expressions hiding a dark truth. Their deaths were not mercy, but sacrifice demanded by forces beyond comprehension. Their story is a beacon shining into the shadows, illuminating the hidden wars fought in silence beneath the surface of faith and society. Carry this knowledge carefully. It is a call to question, to awaken, and to resist. The journey is dangerous, but it is the only path to true freedom. Now, as you step back into your world, you carry a burden and a gift. The burden of forbidden knowledge, the gift of awareness. The dark history of St. Lucia's sanctuary is not just a story of the past. It is a living warning etched into the fabric of our reality. Guard this truth fiercely. Share it only with those prepared to bear its weight. Your awakening has begun. The veil is broken. Remember, power belongs to those who see clearly, and now you are one of them.